Okay, so let me get started. So hi, I'm Wendy Weinberger with Illuminos. We provide academic and executive function coaching to students in third through college. We work in-home directly with our students, or we work virtually, or a mix of both. We have our research-based curriculum. We integrate into an everyday world of the students. So we work with both the schoolwork and the things they have to get done in school, as well as the things that you guys want them to do at home, which Rachel will also help with and helping around the house and being responsible for other things. So this webinar is not actually about us in any way. We do this every month to try to invite parents to have an opportunity to meet other people that can help support you or your children that are fabulous and that we've worked with before that we'd love to give you access to. And so for that reason, we've invited one of our favorite parenting coaches and people, Rachel Bailey, who has been doing this for a very long time. And she can best introduce herself, but I will tell you, she's worked as an ADHD coach, she's worked as a parenting coach, she has a therapy background, and she's just all around fun to work with and has great techniques. They're really easy and not too complicated. So they're really easy to integrate into your everyday world. And if you don't mind, if you could take a second and just throw in the chat, how old are your kids? That would be awesome to get her started. And then I'm going to turn this over to her. So this is avoiding the homework battles, encouraging academic responsibility without that horrible conflict. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Rachel. Are you able to share,
Thank you so
Rachel?
much. Yeah, when you stop sharing, I'll start sharing. Excellent. Thank you, Wendy, so much. I'm always excited to work with Illuminos because I refer so many people to you. Do such a good job with the kids. I obviously work with the parents. And to those parents who are here today, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to give you what I hope are very practical strategies today for reducing the conflict around homework. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Wendy already gave a little bit of an introduction, and I'm so glad she asked the ages of the kids because I always want to know that as well. I'll tailor some of these examples. I'll tell you a few more quick things about me and then jump into what may be going on and how to reduce the conflict. So I will also tell you, by the way, as you're typing in the ages of your kids, I tend to be pretty interactive in my presentations. I will be asking you questions. You can always, as you know, send them your answers directly to me. So I will also share that I am a mom of two. My kids are almost 12 and 14 years old in sixth and ninth grades. My background is clinical psychology. I've been in the field for almost 20 years now. Initially, I started working with kids and teens. I was an ADHD and academic coach. I was what's called an in-home mentor. So I went into people's homes, also trained as a psychotherapist. But what happened was many years ago, maybe now it's been 13 or 14 years, I stopped working with kids and teens and started working with parents because I realized that as you were seeing the behaviors and issues that you're seeing as parents, we're not equipped with the tools to handle some of the things that we want our kids to be able to do, to know how to motivate better behaviors and moods and attitudes. So I started working with parents, even actually before I was a parent myself. And these days I do have a private practice where I support parents with kids with quote unquote big emotions. So these are kids who are anxious or sensitive or maybe strong-willed, kids who have really big reactions when you ask them to do something. And so you may have kids with big emotions if you're here and having a lot of the conflict with your kids. But I will tell you that even if you don't have a big emotions child, the strategies I'm going to teach you today will be effective. So ultimately, I'm here to help you understand how to reduce the conflict, diffuse drama, and that's generally what I do with parents on a regular basis. All right, so that's enough about me. What I want to do is actually start with having you imagine something. I want you to imagine that you have a job and you have a project that you have to get done. And you're trying to do this project, but you're unable to. There's some part of it that you don't know how to do. So maybe there's some really complicated spreadsheets and you really just don't know how to get the result that you want. You're trying hard, but you just don't understand these spreadsheets. And I want you to imagine in this job, as you're struggling with a project, that you have a boss, and I'll call this person boss A. And your boss is noticing that you are not doing the project. They're seeing that there's no result from this project because you're struggling with the spreadsheets or whatever it is you're struggling with. And your boss assumes that you should know how to get this project done because they've hired you for this job. They have asked you to do this, project, and they know it falls within what you're supposed to be able to do. They assume you should know how, and they justify in their mind, well, you as their employee should know how to do this. So they're assuming that because you're not doing it, it's a behavior problem, that they need to discipline you. And they take you aside and they say, okay, since this project isn't getting done, I'm not seeing the results. If you don't get it done, I'm going to put you on a performance improvement plan. There's going to be a consequence to your not getting this job done. And maybe if you do get it done, we can talk about you getting a promotion in the future. But if you don't, just so you know, there's going to be a consequence because they're thinking they have to discipline you, motivate you. Now, you still don't know how to do this project. You still don't know how you haven't figured out these spreadsheets. So you become more and more anxious because you know you might go on a performance improvement plan. And because you're anxious, you're avoiding it more and more. And so your performance continues to get worse. And your boss keeps reminding you of the consequences. So imagine at that moment or through this process, really, how you're feeling. That you are expected to do something. Someone is telling you you should be able to do this and you can't. Now, I want you to imagine a little bit of a different scenario. Still with the same issue, you are working for a boss, you're struggling with a project, you don't know how to do it, still these complicated spreadsheets, but it goes a little bit differently. Now you have a different boss. I'm going to call this boss B. And imagine with boss B, when they see that they're not getting results, this boss says, oh, wow, if I'm not seeing results, this employee must be struggling. There's something going on. I know that, I usually get results. And if I'm not, there's some problem here. Now, they don't then give in and say, oh, they don't come to you and say, oh, you don't have to do this project. I can see you're struggling. They say, no, you do have to do this project. It's a really, really important project. But they say to you, hey, what's going on? Where are you struggling? What is preventing you from doing what you want to do? And when they see that you become anxious even talking about it, I don't know how to do spreadsheets. I'm not really sure. This is harder than everything I've ever done. When they see that those feelings are rising, they notice it, they address it, they see that there's an issue going on there. They listen to what's going on and they specifically teach you strategies to do the project that you didn't know how to do. Now, I want you to imagine through this process how you're feeling, how motivated you are, how you feel about yourself, how you feel about your boss, the person who's trying to motivate you. Because this difference is usually what creates the problems in our homes. We often treat our kids much, it may not look like this on the surface, but we act like boss A when what we really need to do is act like boss B. And this is what causes the conflict in homes. So the reason that we have so many battles over homework, which is what we're here to talk about today, is that we see negativity around homework as a behavior issue. And let's be real, this is where I'm going to start to ask you questions. I do want to be honest that when there are homework issues, there's the resistance for sure, but other things come up as well. What else? I would love for you to put in the chat, and you can always tell me, you can always send it to me privately. What other issues come up with homework? It's not just the resistance. Maybe there's some disrespect. Maybe there's absolutely no motivation. What do you see when it comes to homework issues? I would love to see that in the chat if you're willing to tell me. Like, what brought you here? What problems? Yeah, thanks, Wendy. Child's exhaustion. That's absolutely a huge one. They're so exhausted. ADHD, so there's some resistance and maybe some big reactions. ADHD usually goes along with those big reactions. Disrespect, frustration, gives up. Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Excuses. I love that one. I'll do it later. And then they don't do it later. Distractions, feeling bored, dyslexia. So learning differences. So there's so much. And usually what we do, and we don't always necessarily punish it, let's be honest. But what we do is we see these behaviors and we try to change the behaviors. We try to change the fact that, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they're having excuses, or they're apathetic. That's another one, apathetic, or refusal, or defiance. And we see that and we're like, okay, well, let's see this as a behavior problem. Let's give rewards, let's give consequences. And that does not work. That will only create more homework battles, because we're not really addressing, just like boss A didn't really address what was going on. That's often what happens with us. We don't really address what's going on. So the good news is, if you're having the battles right now, it's because you're addressing the wrong issue. And I'm actually not saying that at all to make you feel bad. In fact, I'm saying that to empower you, because when parents come to me, they're not just dealing with the executive functioning issues, which is what Illuminos are the experts in with their kids. They come to me and they say, but Rachel, there's so much drama around homework. And I say, if there's drama around homework, you're not dealing with the right issue. We can reduce the drama so easily if we address the right issue. So I'm going to tell you, obviously, what that is. Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And inability, not refusal to start tasks. I was just looking at that last comment. Absolutely. So we do see a lot of the resistance, the disrespect, the shutdowns, the meltdowns, all of that. Absolutely. And it's really that's not what we need to be addressing. It's not these behaviors that we need to address. Those behaviors are only symptoms of something else. What's really going on, what's really causing the homework battles, is that we're doing the wrong thing. This is what I call a skills yuck issue. And I'm going to talk to you about what I mean by that. Not addressing this as a skills or yuck issue is what creates the battles. We're not addressing the right thing. Our kids feel worse and things go downhill. So I want to tell you that what we're going to emphasize today is what is really going on with your kids' skills and with their yuck, and how, if we address the right thing, things get so much better. I've helped thousands of families reduce the drama around homework and all other negative behaviors, to be honest. This is going to apply to any negative behavior. All right, so I'm going to talk about how to reduce battles. And there are 3 things that I'm going to teach you today. Number 1 is understanding that homework resistance, or any negative behavior, is a sign that their skills are low and their yuck is high. So I'm going to talk a little bit about skills, but again, you may know a few of the strategies for skills. Illuminos are the experts in helping your child handle the skills. I will talk about those a little bit today, though, because it's so important to see how they affect what I call the yuck. I'm really going to focus on the yuck, because this is where a lot of parents go downhill. So we're going to talk about the fact that skills are low and yuck is high. And I'm going to ask you what you're seeing in your family as well. So I always talk about this like a seesaw. Whenever a child's skills are low and their yuck is high, you will see negative behaviors, moods, and attitudes from your child. You will see the resistance, the disrespect, the shutting down, the melting down, the just like, I'm not doing this, the refusal, the defiance. That's a sign that someone's skills are low and their yuck is high. So what we're going to do, now that I'm going to teach you what this looks like, but what I'm going to teach you also how to do is, number 2, address their skills and address their yuck. And so much of what I'm going to talk about today focuses a little bit on the skills, but really brings in the impact of their yuck and what's going on. I'm going to define yuck for you too as well, but you can kind of get a feel for what it means just by hearing the word. When we are able to increase the skills and reduce the yuck, the battles go away, the drama diffuses, and everything gets so much easier. All right, so let's talk about skills. I am assuming that, and in fact, let me just ask the question. I don't want to assume. Write yes in the chat if you're familiar with the term executive functioning skills. My guess is if you're here with Illuminos, you are, but some of you may have come from my audience. I just want to make sure. Yes, if you're familiar. I'm not expecting to see any no's, but if so, I'm going to slow down a little bit. So be honest. You can send me a direct message. Okay, excellent. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so you already know that executive functioning skills are the skills required to plan and execute responsible behavior. When I often come in is when kids sort of have the skills and they're not listening to parents who are suggesting that they use them. That's usually when I come in, that kids say, I know I'm supposed to do X, Y, Z, but I can't. And so I come in and say, why are you as a parent not having influence? And it's usually related to the yuck. But let me talk a little bit more about the skills, because I mentioned when skills are low. So you probably already know that there are a lot of, executive functioning skills we could talk about, but some that really lead to homework battles because there's a lot of resistance is when your kids, and I actually am going to ask you where your kids' skills are on a scale from 1 to 10 as I describe them. Some of the skills that come into play when it comes to homework is the ability to start a boring task. So I want to ask you, think of one child, just one child in your family. On a scale from 1 to 10, how good is their ability, or how strong is their ability to start a task that is boring? 1 meaning not very high. They don't do a really good job of this. They really struggle with this. 10 meaning, it's easy peasy for them. Where is your child on a scale from 1 to 10? Okay, yeah, very much 0. So we have ones, mostly ones, very much 0, 3. So pretty darn low. Yeah. So there are strategies we can teach kids. And again, Illuminos teaches those strategies, but there's strategies we can teach kids to get started with a boring task, where I'm going to come in and say, if you're trying to teach your kids these skills and they're not listening to you, or if they know them and they're just not using them, that's where the yuck comes in. But I do want to recognize that this skill, your kids are already pretty low. And then we add yuck on top of that, and that's where the battles come in. I will just say about the boring task, there's something that I talk to a lot of my families about called the avoider brain. It's not an anatomical part of the brain, but there is part of our brain that is wired to avoid things that are uncomfortable. And so what our kids have learned is that boring tasks are really not just uncomfortable, but especially if you have a child who has been diagnosed with ADHD, or you've seen this in their behavior, their brains are actually understimulated. That's why they are constantly kind of moving and doing things like that. And they're always looking for stimulation. And so their brain now sees boring tasks as like danger. This is a threat. So what I call the avoider brain kicks in, and then they won't even start it. There's strategies we can teach them, but if they don't have those strategies, you're going to see the negative behavior. All right, the next one, staying on task when something is boring. Where's your child on this? 1 meaning they have a really hard time staying on task because they get easily distracted. 10 meaning, this is easy for them. So where does your child fall in staying on task when something is boring? 1s and 2s? Yeah. I didn't mention this earlier. I also have a daughter with ADHD. My 14-year-old has ADHD. This is something that we talk about all the time. Of course, I was an ADHD coach. I have lots of strategies, but this is definitely something where she struggles and needs to almost change up her strategies all the time. So I'm in this with you all. She probably has a 1 as well without all the strategies she uses. All right, how about this one? Disengaging from an engaging task. And that's really a fancy way of saying they have trouble stopping doing the thing that feels good. So they don't want to get off of their device. They don't want to stop. Maybe they love reading. They don't want to stop reading. They don't want to stop doing something, talking to their friends, whatever it is. So I want to hear, how does your child do disengaging from engaging tasks once they're in it, once they found something that feels good? 1 meaning really low, 10 meaning they're great at this. You'll know you have low numbers if there's a lot of reaction when you ask them to stop things. So a lot of your kids are better at this than the other things. That totally makes sense. That's great. Good for me to know, though. All right, so this is what I meant by skills are low. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind. The fact that their skills are low creates what I call a lot of yuck. And the yuck is really what needs to be addressed, because a lot of us will say, hey, I've read all these strategies for teaching my kids these skills. And I'll give you a couple of tips for these skills as well. I've read all these strategies, but my child isn't using them. My child is resisting me talking about them. That is because of the yuck. So let's talk about this concept of yuck. So the yuck concept is really, really simple. And this is where I'm going to actually define yuck in just a moment. But here's the principle you need to know about. When human beings are in a good place, when we are not too stressed, we're not overwhelmed, we're happy, maybe we had a good conversation with a friend or a spouse, we're in a good place, that's when you see positive, mature, responsible behavior. But we're in a place that I call yuck, and yuck is a blanket term I use to describe anything uncomfortable. It could be that someone is tired or hungry or stressed or overwhelmed or feels incapable or feels like no one cares about them or whatever it is. Any of these feelings cause yuck, what I call yuck. And when humans are in a place of yuck, you do not see positive behavior. The positive behavior may be, well, my child uses strategies that they know to use. When they're in yuck, they're not going to use those strategies. Yuck prevents us from acting positively. Yuck prevents us from learning. Yuck prevents us from doing the things that we need to do. And I want to talk a little bit about why this is the case. So I'll tell you a little bit about what happens in the brain. It's a very primitive picture of the brain, forgive me. But what happens in the brain when someone is in yuck. So first, let's talk about the fact that there is a part of the brain that allows us to be mature and responsible and do the thing we're supposed to do. You've probably heard this because you're all familiar with executive functioning. You know that executive functioning skills develop in the prefrontal cortex, that this is the part of the brain that allows us to be mature and responsible, because it's really This part of the brain allows us to align our behavior with our values, with the long-term, what we generally want. It allows us to control our impulses. So this is the part of the brain where if your child is like dreading doing homework and they have their avoider brain kicks in, this is the part of the brain that would say, I really want to go on my phone or I want to go do that thing, but no, I'm not going to. I'm going to go do my homework. This is the part of the brain that regulates emotion. So when they're like, oh my gosh, this is so uncomfortable, this part of the brain would say, hey, it's okay, we can get through this. Problem solving, all the executive functioning skills live in this part of the brain. You probably also know that this part of the brain doesn't fully develop till the mid-20s. So I saw the ages of your kids, not quite there yet. So they don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. However, there's like a level playing field in all of this, no matter what age, because everyone is affected by yuck. And so what happens again, this concept of yuck, if your child, or you, by the way, this is all going to relate to you as well. If someone is hungry, tired, disappointed, frustrated, feeling fear, anger, helplessness, boredom, overwhelm, whatever it is, I'm not even going to say, hey, your kids are anxious, that's why they're not doing it. I just bundle that all together. They're feeling anything, that's why they're not doing their homework. So when they're feeling yuck, what happens is our brain, no matter our age, interprets yuck as a problem or a threat. So our brain turns on an alarm, and that alarm is our fight or flight response. And one of the first things our fight or flight response does is it shuts off access to parts of the brain or body that are not necessary for survival. So it shuts off access to that prefrontal cortex. So even if your kids have those strategies, they've heard them 100 times. If they're in yuck, they're not going to use them. So what happens is our behavior is not positive. It becomes really negative. We become impulsive and self-centered and controlling. We see negative behavior. So far, is this something that you can see in yourself or your child? Just write yes if you've seen this in yourself or your child, that when you're in a bad place, things go downhill. It's kind of an obvious question, but I really want you to process that, because we address the yuck behaviors, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, but we don't address the yuck. And that's where the explosions happen. Okay, seeing those yeses coming in. All right, we're going to get a little bit more specific into the yuck behaviors you see. So what I want you to do is imagine in your mind, as I'm going through this, your child or anyone in your life who struggles who has I would say the hardest behavior for you to handle. Whatever the behavior is, who's the hardest for you to handle? I want you to have that person in mind as I describe what yuck behaviors look like. So imagine that person. And when I describe yuck behaviors, these are all signs that someone is in yuck and none of their skills are going to work, or they're not going to behave positively. Yuck behaviors tend to come in 3 clusters. And as you're imagining this person, I want you to think about which cluster do their behaviors fall into. They could fall into all 3. It could be 1, it could be 2, but these are all symptoms that someone is in yuck. First type of yuck behaviors, again, I want you to imagine what you see, is what I call yuck turned out. So they are maybe frustrated because you told them they couldn't go to their friend's house, and because they didn't do their homework, so they have to stay home and do their homework, and they turn their yuck out. They have lots of yuck about that. They become aggressive. They become defiant, saying, no, I'm not going to listen to you. They slam doors. They shove things off the desk. Maybe it's not that dramatic. Maybe it is. They become disrespectful. They say, I'm not listening to you. Blame is a textbook indicator of yuck turned out, where they say, well, you should have told me I had to do my homework. I can almost guarantee you did tell them they had to do their homework, but they don't want to hold on more yuck. They want to turn it out. They don't want to take on more. They're trying to get rid of it. Controlling behavior, where they negotiate or try to get control of the situation, that's yuck turned out. It's basically they have a lot of yuck inside and they're just pushing it outside of them. That's one cluster of yuck behaviors. Another cluster of yuck behaviors is yuck turned in. Yuck turned in, and I will tell you, as a former therapist who was a therapist for difficult adolescents, that's who I saw, I will tell you that a lot of kids who turn yuck out eventually turn it in as well. You can see this really easily if you have the child who's really hard on themselves. They say this out loud. I always mess up. I never do anything right. I'm always doing the wrong thing. Or why do you like my brother or sister more than you like me? It's this sort of almost like the Eeyore, like, woe is me. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. It's just they feel like the world is against them. Yuck turned in is also avoidance. Avoidance. I remember when I was a therapist, and I would, again, get those adolescents who were pretty difficult, and they were struggling in school, a lot of them, because I was also an ADHD and academic coach. They would say to me, Rachel, I really don't think I can put in the energy it takes me to do well on this test. So I'd rather not try than put in all that energy and know I'm going to fail anyway. So this avoidance is yuck turned in. It's like these things that they do that almost sabotage themselves. I will also tell you, as someone who's trained in clinical psychology, that anxiety is a lot of yuck that is unprocessed, or they're just turning it back on themselves. All right, third cluster, and when we get to this cluster, I'm going to ask you which one you see. Third cluster is numbing yuck. And sometimes this happens outside of the moment. Maybe not when they're really upset, but they will go to numb. And by the way, as adults, we do this all the time too. That it's not just our kids. We are a culture of yuck numbers, where they'll go to their devices or sugar, or as they get a little bit older, alcohol or drugs. I can tell you that when I was a therapist, almost every single adolescent that I saw was smoking marijuana, honestly, because they had so much yuck inside. They didn't know how to deal with it, so they were numbing it. But it's when your kids want it, they're drawn to that thing because life out here is really hard. And so I want to go to the place that feels good. Now, also, I put busyness on here because so many adults, we can recognize this. Yeah, we're on art, electronics, we're on social media, we tune out by news or sports, but a lot of us use busyness to numb. I'm so busy, I don't want to sit down because that's when all my uncomfortable feelings come up. It's a very typical way of numbing yuck. All right, so I'd love to hear in the chat what you see in this person you were imagining. Do they turn it out? Do they turn it in? Do they numb? Do they do all three? You can always send me a direct message, but I want to know what you see turned out. Most turned in, but certainly some of all three. It's very common to see some of all three, by the way. So don't be like, that's worse. It's not worse. It just is what it is. All three, especially turned in and numbed, out. Yeah, turned in and numbed. Absolutely. And so what I want out then in, yeah, that happens too. Exactly. So what I want you to think about from now on, when you see negative behaviors, our instinct and the way we were raised, and what we hear a lot in the world of how do you parent a child, we hear, get rid of that behavior, get rid of that behavior, that's not acceptable. The number of times I hear that, it's not acceptable for them to XYZ, or I'm so worried that they are hard on themselves, I have to make that stop. You're never going to get anywhere when you try to make that stop. What you have to do is actually address the yuck. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to address yuck when it comes to homework specifically, although I talk about it in terms of everything. But to keep us focused, we'll talk about it in terms of yuck. All right, so what happens probably, and I'm going to ask you if you recognize this phenomenon, is when parents get to me, they have usually experienced many, many what I call cycles of yuck, because yuck behaviors, yuck turned out, yuck turned in, yuck numbed, it triggers us. When we see our child turning their yuck out or in, we get triggered. We go into yuck and we create more yuck for everybody. And then our kids go more into yuck. So here's what the cycle of yuck looks like. I want you to say yes in the chat as soon as you recognize this cycle, if you do. So your child has some sort of yuck behavior. Maybe they're avoiding their homework, or they're melting down, or they are becoming disrespectful, or they're just anxious, whatever it is, there's some sort of yuck behavior. And when they have this yuck behavior, because it's usually negative behavior, something that either worries you or angers you or frustrates you, it puts you into yuck, and you have some sort of yuck behavior. So again, maybe you told your child they couldn't go to their friend's house because they didn't do their homework. They need to stay home and do their homework. And they say, I hate you. Why are you always on my back? I've got it. Leave me alone. That yuck behavior puts you into yuck. And then you start yelling at them or threatening to take away things from them because you're in yuck. So your yuck behavior tends to make things worse. They become more upset because they're becoming more upset. Their yuck behavior gets worse, which triggers your yuck behavior, I'm getting the yeses, which triggers their yuck behavior. This is a very, very common cycle that we see their behavior as yuck and we tend to get sucked into it. We don't realize what's really going on, and we don't have the capacity to deal with their yuck. We don't know how. Because here I have another question for you. Yes or no? When you were growing up, did your parents teach you how to handle difficult emotions, either in yourself or anyone else? Yes, they taught you how to handle difficult emotions, or no, they did not. Yes, they taught you, or no, they did not. All the no's. Yeah, gosh, no. It's so common. I talk about emotions for a living. And just for the record, when I started graduate school, I was actually in a PhD program. I got pregnant, so I didn't get my PhD, but I was in a PhD program. And I remember early in my days, they were like, there was a class on emotions. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be so stupid. This class on emotions is going to be dumb. I don't need to know about. And now I teach emotions for a living because guess what? None of us learned how. And it's our yuck emotions that tend to get in the way of everything. But we don't know how to deal with it. So it tends to put us into yuck. All right, so what we are going to do going forward, they're supposed to be repressed, right? I love that. They're supposed to be repressed. That's what we learned. That's what they learned in our parents' defense. That's what they learned too, because their parents repressed theirs. So let's just say this is a cycle that I am very passionate about breaking. And again, we're going to really apply this to homework. How do we break this when it comes to homework? What we're going to do is when we see these yuck behaviors, when we see these signs that our kids are shutting down or melting down, whatever it is, anything except going to do the homework, anything except that, we need to come in and we need to address their skills and we need to reduce their yuck. Now, there's one thing that I'm not going to talk that much about. I'm only going to mention it once, but I just want you to hear. If you hear these and you're like, my child would be really resistant to this. One of the things that is very important, and I teach in all my programs when I work with parents, is in order to increase skills and reduce their yuck, you have to be what I call a powerful, positive influence. Now, that's a topic in itself. But I want you to know if you are struggling, if you say, hey, I've tried this with their skills and I've tried this with their yuck, because parents come to me and say that, we have to take a step back. Now, again, I didn't want to pack this too much. So I didn't go off on powerful positive parent, being a powerful positive influence. But if you're thinking that, I will tell you that's going to be your next step. But this will eventually come into play. And anybody else, all these strategies are going to be very helpful for you. All right. So what I want you to remember, when you see anything except them going to do homework, anything else is a sign that they're having a problem, not being a problem. And because we were trained to see emotions as problems, we tend to get sucked into yuck, and that's what we focus on. We tend to get sucked into the behavior. That's what we need to break. So we're going to break that cycle. So let's start with increasing skills. Again, I'm not going to go too much into this, although I just want to show you from my perspective some of the things I used to do as an ADHD coach. Again, I always defer Illuminos, they're the experts in this. I just want to give a couple things because I used to work with adolescents of what I used to do, just to give you an idea. And as I'm teaching you this, what this whole presentation is layered with is the approach I use will reduce yuck. So when you're trying to teach these skills, you have to approach it in a certain way. I learned that the hard way as an ADHD coach. You have to approach it in a certain way. And the way you're going to do that, and this is already going to start to decrease their yuck, is you really want to make it you and them against the problem, not you against your child. As soon as you try to get your child to do homework, it is you against them. And so we really have to approach this with you and them against the problem. The problem is their executive functioning, that they haven't mastered certain executive functioning skills. The problem is that they have a lot of yuck. Remember, this is not a behavior problem. This is a skills yuck problem. So we need to make it you and them against the problem, not you against them. So as soon as you find yourself trying to get your child to do something, you are against them, that increases their yuck. Because basically yuck happens whenever the brain senses a threat. They experience you trying to get them to do their homework as a threat, you will lose your influence. So there's some influence coming in already. All right, so instead, we're going to deal with the problem. I'm going to give a couple of strategies for disengagement because a lot of parents usually tell me this is an issue. So I just want to give you some disengagement strategies. This is when your child is already in an activity and they have trouble starting something else. So here's what we're going to do. Here's what I mean by working against the problem. The first disengagement strategy to think about is usually when we want our kids to stop something, we use timers. And timers do not address the problem. The reason kids have trouble disengaging from something is because their brains are looking for something that provides enough stimulation and engagement. When they have, when they struggle with executive functioning skills, almost by definition, they're going to look for the thing that is stimulating and engaging. And when they're in that place, if they haven't ended that activity, they're going to go into yuck very, very quickly. And I always say to parents, imagine you are typing an email and you know exactly what you're going to say and your mind is in the email and your child comes up to you and they say, hey, mom, or hey, dad, or hey, caregiver, whoever you are. They say, hey, I have a question. And you're like, you're right in it. You're like, no, I'm in the middle of something. And you say to them, come back in 5 minutes. So they dutifully leave. They come back in 5 minutes, but in 5 minutes, you still have 2 sentences left. You're still in the zone. You have 2 sentences left. They come back and they're like, it's been 5 minutes, but you're still in it. You're still going to get annoyed with the fact that they're asking you for your attention because our brains are wired to stay on task or to stay in the place that feels good, to stay in that zone. So just because you used a timer, that doesn't mean that they have ended the activity. So working against the problem means don't just put in timers. That's not addressing the problem. The problem is that they need closure points and they don't know how to find closure points. And closure points are so important because imagine this, imagine you're writing that email, you finish the email, it's all done. Then you can turn your attention very easily. That's what we need to realize. Our kids have problems ending their attention track to go to the next track. So the way we work against the problem is we teach them closure points. And there are, what I usually do, I'm not going to get too into this because I want to get into the yuck, but what I usually do is start with things that have easier and more obvious closure points, like television shows or, something that has like a step-by-step process. They're not going to be able to get off their video games easily. So I used to tell parents, your kids have to work up to finding closure points in video games. And they have to prove to you that they can find those closure points and not freak out when they have to get off of their video game to come to the dinner table. So that's what I mean by working with them against the problem. We're going to say, hey, I know your brain needs closure points, so we need to figure out what that is. And I'm going to give you a strategy for how to figure this out for them in just a moment. Another way to help with disengagement is because they need those closure points and they have such a hard time getting out of this, what we tend to do is we say, stop doing what you're doing to come to the dinner table, or stop doing this, it's time to go to soccer practice or whatever it is. We're like yanking them out of that world where they are. Another way to help them with this is instead of trying to yank them, use what I call a slow descent. So say to them, walk over to them, say, hey, I can see that even if they're on a video game, you're on level 5 of the video game. Tell me what you were doing to get to level 5 so they can talk about it. And then you say, tell me as we're walking to the car. So what's interesting about the way the brain disengages is when the environment starts to shift, it's easier to disengage. So they're still engaged, but you're walking with them to the car. It helps their brain disengage. So again, you're saying to them, I know the problem is you have trouble disengaging, or you can use another word. You have trouble. We're going to work to figure out what is going on here. You're not the issue. It's the difficulty with disengaging. All right, I'm going to give you one more example of a skill. And these are going to be more engagement strategies. I know a lot of you said that your kids struggle to stay engaged. This is a lot of what I did as an ADHD coach with teenagers. We worked a lot on this. This is what I do with my own daughter a lot, although she now knows her strategies and wants me off her back, which is typical, but engagement strategies. So what's really important to understand about engagement strategies is our kids' brains have such struggle engaging if something is not engaging them. So the good news is we can make any task engaging. That doesn't mean it's fun. That means it's engaging. And they're two different things. So I used to work with a lot of kids on studying, which is not engaging. And what they usually used to do is like grin and like, well, first of all, they would just read. Reading is not studying. Wendy and her staff can tell you all about that, but reading is not studying. But I would say, okay, we have to study. And they would just like kind of, oh, all right, I'm going to study, but I'm going to try to like push as hard as I can for 5 minutes. That does not work. Willpower will never work against the avoider brain. The avoider brain is too strong. It's too smart. So we use engagement, and there are lots of ways we can create engagement. I never had a student I couldn't create engagement with, and usually it came from them. But here are some ideas. Movement while you are studying. So I did a lot of, let's just say they have to study for like vocabulary for English. Where they would say the words out loud. And as they were moving around the room, I would challenge some kids, they would take a step to the pace of their speech. So moving and saying what they had to say and trying to incorporate all that together, believe it or not, that can actually help them remember the words rather than just sitting still. It seems like it's so much going on. It's not. It's an engager for a lot of kids. Cognitive strategies. One strategy that works really well is to take a tune you know really well, like the ABC song, and whatever you have to memorize, put it to the tune of the song you know really well. That's an example of a cognitive strategy. There are a lot of really fun mnemonics you can use too. Like I would have kids, if they had to study something for science, they would imagine whatever they were studying, like if they were doing the planets, I'm just making this up, they would imagine a different planet in a different room of their house. And they would walk around the room of their house and they would imagine what Jupiter looked like in their bedroom. And those kind of memory cognitive strategies can help them on a test remember things. And it's so much more engaging to memorize that way. Using colors and pictures, different kinds of pens, different mind maps, things like that. These are not fun. They're not going to say, yeah, I love studying, but these are engaging. And there is a novelty component for sure, but there's a strategy I teach called variations, where once you know what works, you can vary it to help with a novelty issue. All right, so if anybody's using any other strategies for disengagement or engagement, please put them in the chat. That is, I would love to hear what your kids use, because chances are they're using something maybe, or they've heard something that works. Put it in the chat. But what I'm going to do now, and to wrap us up for the last few minutes, is focus on, remember I mentioned this is a skills issue, this is a yuck issue. Now I'm really going to focus on the yuck issue. And specifically, like I said, I have 50 different strategies to address yuck, but I'm really going to focus on the homework yuck now. On the yuck that comes up just when they start to think about homework, the yuck that comes up that prevent them from using these strategies. So yeah, we've addressed the skills, but again, if the yuck is there, they're not going to use them. And remember, if you try to approach them with these strategies and they're like, I don't want to hear any of that, that's an influence issue, just so you know. And that's something obviously I can help with. All right, so we're going to work together on the right issue. That's the skills piece. But how do we reduce yuck? So ultimately, what we want to do is shift from judgment and control to curiosity and experimenting. Now, this is really the crux of the programs I do with parents, because there are things that are going to work, but they're not always going to work immediately. And I don't always know. I'm really good at coming up with ideas to try. That's like a superpower of mine, but I don't always know what's going to work with a child. So we do a lot of experimenting. I'm going to show you what an experiment looks like right now, because what we're doing is we're saying, okay, the problem is closure, or the problem is engagement. So what's going to work? Well, we don't know until we do some testing and some experiments. And this also puts kids in the driver's seat, which reduces their yuck a lot. But our job is to shift from judgment and control. Judgment is seeing their behavior and thinking it's bad. We have to shift out of that. We have to stop saying, this is a bad behavior. I'm afraid of this behavior. My child is resistant. They're being defiant. They're being disrespectful. This is horrible. And say, this behavior will actually go away when we address what's causing it. Shift out of judgment, shift out of control, where we're trying to get our kids to do homework. Remember, I said that's a big piece of this. As soon as you try to get your child to do homework, you lose your influence because it creates yuck for them. What we do is we move to curiosity and experimenting. This is a yuck reducer. So we're now on the same page saying, I recognize there's some skills missing. Let's kind of figure out what these skills are. So how do you figure out what these skills are? First tip for you. Ask your child what they hate about doing whatever they're doing, what they hate about writing English papers. Is my camera blurry? Okay. Sorry, I don't know why my camera went blurry, or even had to like change that. Sorry about that. I can like try to reset it. Sorry about that. I'm actually not gonna spend too much time because I'm not sure. Oh, cover it. Yeah. There we go. Okay, there we go. So ask them what they hate. Ask them, so what do you hate about writing your English paper? What do you hate about geometry? What do you hate about it? A lot of us don't want to hear our kids' negativity. In fact, if you have a child with big emotions, they tend to go immediately to negativity. But as a trained therapist and coach, to me, complaints are gold. Instead of lecturing them and convincing them, we have to ask them what they hate about it. I want to know what a child hates about it. And often they're either going to say, I don't know, which honestly tends to be either they genuinely don't know or an influence problem, or they're just going to say, I don't feel like it. And to me, that says, that means we need to teach you a strategy for doing things you don't feel like doing. We need to figure out when you don't feel like doing your homework, how do we get around that? So to me, complaints are gold. It's a very, very connective question. It's a very yuck reducing question, because you're asking with curiosity. Instead of trying to get a child to do something, you're saying, what do you hate about it? I want to work with you on this. Again, if they're not answering this question at all, if they're like, I don't even want to talk to you, then you have to back up and work on your influence. But assuming that they're willing to talk to you, this question will give you gold. If they say, I don't know, don't worry about it. You can say, okay, I've heard some ideas. Let's see which ones we can try, because I want to make your experience with homework less miserable. We always want to show them we're on their side, we have their back. Homework stinks. It's miserable. I want to show you how to make it less miserable. So ultimately, that's one way to increase your influence, is to show them you have their back. The other thing that you can do to reduce yuck and to work with them against the problem is to try different strategies. Again, when parents work with me, the first thing I do is work on their influence. Once their influence is in place and a child is open to talking, then we work on, okay, but what's going to work? To me, something will always work. I rarely get stumped because we keep going until something works. So here's an example of what I mean. Let's say a child has to study for their English vocabulary. This is an example of a chart that a student came up with when I was working with them. That was an experiment that we did together. And I give this chart to students and I say, okay, I don't know what's going to work. You're in charge of this. You're going to tell me what is helpful and what is not. So this student had, their task was English vocabulary. You always have to define what success looks like. I can answer 95% correctly. So her teacher had given her some practice tests, so she could answer those 95% correctly. And then we came up with together, we brainstormed, what are you going to try? And she tried some of the strategies I mentioned to you before. She tried changing lyrics to a song. She tried walking around. She tried listening to music. And she just documented, because this is another yuck reducing strategy. I always defer to them as the expert. I say, I don't know what's going to work with you. You have to figure it out. Our whole goal is to make it less miserable. How can we make this less miserable so you can meet your measure of success? We are working with them against the problem. Again, as soon as they think we're against them, they shut down. Now, I will tell you a key. This is me working with difficult adolescents. Here's a huge tip for you. You don't want to say, did that work or not? Because they're going to say nothing works. The number of teenagers who told me nothing works. I mean, if I had $1 for all those, I'd be a millionaire. What we want to do instead is say, okay, they're all awful. Which stinks the least? I want you to rank them in terms of which you like best and which you like least. And then what we do is we take the one that they rank as number one because that's the best. And that's where the variations come in. Okay, you liked changing lyrics to a song. Let's come up with some variations and let's see which of these work best. Now, all this time, they are trying to figure out what's going to make homework less miserable. And they're motivated by not wanting to spend too much time on this. I can tell you as a parent, my kids don't want to spend too much time on that. They want to just figure out the thing because they don't want to keep talking about this. That's the truth. So they're figuring out what works for them. We're working with them against the problem. So what I want you to see that we did was we saw a skills issue, but throughout this whole time, what we're also working on is the yuck issue. Is the fact that they go into yuck because they think we're trying to control them. They go into yuck because they think our only agenda is to get them to do what we want. I heard that so often as a therapist. I heard this comment a lot. And think about whether your child might say this. They would say things like, Rachel, I know my parents love me, but they're only nice to me or they're only really respectful of me when I'm doing what they want. That's when they're the nicest to me. So the message they get from that is our agenda is to get them to listen because we reward their listening and we kind of punish through our tone, through our judgment, through our anger when they don't listen to us. We have to be on the same team. We have to reduce the yuck as much as we teach the skills. And if you're having the battles, your child doesn't have the skills already probably, but the yuck is probably very, very large. So I just started to hit the tip of the iceberg when it comes to yuck. I just wanted you to start to see that the problem is a little different than maybe what you thought about it was before. It's not a behavior issue. It's not an issue like, as I actually summarize, we have to figure out what works. We have to figure out what they need to be successful. And we do this as a team. So let me summarize because we're going to get to questions. Just as I wrap up, if they won't try anything, by the way, if they're like, I'm not going to talk to you, that's where I said earlier, you have to be able to improve your influence. You have to become what I call a powerful positive influence. All right, so let me review the big picture of what I talked about today. What we want to think about is we can't react to their behavior. We can't react to they're not doing homework, they're being disrespectful. That is never going to get you anyway. That was like what boss A did. Boss A was like, this is an issue. I need to take consequences. I need to reward you. That's not what's going on here. And that will only create more yuck. We have to really see what is going on beneath the behavior. Why isn't a child doing homework? And almost always it's related to their skills are low, their yuck is high. So remember that's that seesaw there, and that's going to lead to negativity. What we do, we address their skills. I talked about two. There are many other ways to address skills, and we reduce their yuck. Remember, complaints are gold. We're experimenting. We're with them against the problem. We reduce their yuck, which can be complicated. I simplified it today. It can be very complicated. But if you don't address the yuck, it is going to lead to battles. So, remember, making it you and them against the problem, not you against them. If you do this right, and I teach families how to do this right, a solution will be found. When you reduce the yuck and address the skills, a solution will be found. All right, I want to wrap up and get us to questions. I will just keep the slide up just for a moment. I can also give this information to Wendy if she sends out the replay, Wendy and Lindsay. But I will say that if you want to get more tips, here's a way you can get those tips. You can put tips in an email to info@rachel-bailey.com. I also have a podcast, a Facebook group. So I would love, though, now to answer any questions that you have about any of this.
So real quick, before you do that, I'm going to step in to announce. Rachel, can you see my screen?
Yes. No, let me stop sharing.
Oh.
Go for it.
Can you see any partnership?
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to announce with I just went too fast. Oh yeah, there we go. Going back and forth here. That we have partnered up with Rachel because we believe so much in her work. And we think that the best thing for you and your child is for your child to learn the skills that she just talked about with respect to what your child needs to do. And for you to get the support you need to keep things calmer at home. And so I've been working with Rachel for years. We love her. I always refer people to her. So we decided to partner up. And we're really thrilled about this partnership. And we have also created a special offer to continue to work with Rachel. This is sort of a summary. It's a series of 5 to 6 sessions you can book 6 sessions. She has 5 defined and 1 undefined in this, and it's a great way to keep the conversation going. And so we would love for you to do that. There's a QR code at the bottom of your screen that you can scan to book right away with Rachel. And when I take you over to the next page for her to answer questions, the QR code will be there for her as well. And if you decide that you want to talk to me about getting your kiddos some executive functioning skills, either in home or virtually or hybrid, please reach out to us and you can click either or take a picture of either a QR code to go forward. I don't want to go over the slide because I don't want to take too much of Rachel's time. The last thing that before we wrap up, I will say is in case anybody gets off, I hope your friends and family are all safe in this hurricane that is horrible, that has hit Florida. I know my family was impacted, and I just hope that we all can send a little bit of good energy, prayers, whatever path you choose to do that, but send some hugs down to those everyone on the phone and everyone on the call who has friends and families in Florida or who are being impacted by this hurricane. Okay, with that, I'm turning it over to Rachel. Go ahead.
Okay. So thank you, Wendy, for announcing that. Yeah, I'm so excited because, again, we're like mutual fan club here. And by the way, as I'm talking, please type your questions in the chat because I'm happy to answer any questions at this point. So I'll just talk until I see any questions. Because the combination of what the executive functioning support that Illuminos provides and the parent support, I mean, it's like the skills are addressed, the yuck is addressed, and it's so cohesive because we can refer back and forth to each other, but when we're working together as a unit, it's really, really cohesive for your family. So I'm so excited about this partnership as well. And we'll be sharing, the webinar will be shared next week. All right, does anyone have any questions about the yuck, the skills, anything related to resistance, negative behaviors? Okay, should there be consequences defined so child understands that if homework is not done, something may happen? Yes, there absolutely. So the way I teach setting boundaries, setting limits, it should think whatever's going to happen should always be defined ahead of time, and the child should be part of it. So I actually define consequences as 2 things. Number 1, what is it that's going to motivate your child? It's not always taking away something. Consequences could be rewards. Consequences just means something's going to happen. So it should be defined ahead of time with your child involved. And number 2, this is huge if you want to increase your influence with your child, that it's something that is in your control to do. So if you say to your child, you have to do your homework, they can't just say, oh, well, I'm going to do it. There has to be something that is in your control to do. So you could say something like, well, my idea is I'm going to XYZ, but it has to be something you can do. Otherwise, you're going to feel out of control if your child doesn't do whatever the consequence was. So just keep that in mind. Consequences are whatever works, and it has to be in your control. And whatever works, I actually have parents experiment. That same table I showed you, a lot of what I do with parents is we're going to figure out what works. Almost every family I work with has success, period, because we keep going until something works. And I always know how to figure out what works. It's just we have to test it. So yes, it should be defined. It should be, your child should be involved with it, and it should be something that you can actually do. Absolutely. Let me get that chat back. Okay. How can you tell if homework issues are rooted in something neurological or if that requires an assessment? So I don't know if, Wendy, you want to answer that or you want me to? I mean, I can answer it, but is that something you
Go ahead,
want?
since you're on a roll for it, I'll just keep going and then you can roll into the next question.
Okay. Generally, what I say is that, first of all, if there's an assessment that needs to be required, my guess is that the school would have identified it. If there's usually a discrepancy, an assessment is needed when there's a discrepancy between where they should be and where they actually are, then you need to assess what's actually going on. And usually you'll see that again, it'll be defined by a teacher, it'll be defined by, people probably will have noticed that and have said to you, maybe you want to get this checked out. What I will also say about assessments is if you're just not sure, you can often work on the yuck first, because anxiety and other mental health issues or things going on or other types of yuck, I'll just put it in a big bucket, can actually affect performance as well. So work on the yuck as well, because that you can start to do immediately. And sometimes the performance changes, but if the yuck is not there and the performance doesn't change, there's probably a need for an assessment. Okay, so the next point is the sheer amount of homework, 2+ hours for my 4th grader. What? Well, okay, sorry, I shouldn't have had that reaction, but that is a lot of homework. Besides simply stopping at 40 to 60 minutes, any other strategies to manage the load while dealing with the executive functioning challenges? Again, I can answer, but Wendy, this is you guys.
So your 4th grader should not have that much homework. there's something wrong either with the teacher or your child is struggling and really could use some help on managing that so it's less time. Typically, just so everybody knows, the research shows that kids can only study for 1 minute per year of age between 0 and 20, which means if you have a fourth grader who is 10 years old, you're getting 4 minutes at a time of individual focus for them. So let's try to talk about the executive functioning problems that might be going on. There could be a lot of things that actually Rachel talked about where a child is struggling and distracted, or their fear of failure. They don't want to start it. They're overwhelmed. They're not sure where to start. They didn't bring the right materials home. There's a whole bunch of different things that could be going on here. But the biggest thing to take away is something isn't right. So I'm happy to talk to you. I would start with the teacher and share with the teacher that your child is taking 40 to 60 minutes to do homework in fourth grade. And is that actually correct? And is that what they're giving them? Are they not finishing work or not paying attention in school? And that's why they have more to do? Or, oh, you've talked to the teacher. Okay. Have you observed your child working on the homework? Because that may be another place to identify what's going on. Is the child have a designated place? Is the phone out of the room? Are they on their computer working? If they are they locked out of doing other things like playing games and instant messenger? Those are some of the things to look at. If you want to sort of sit afar and take some observation notes, I would definitely look at what they're doing and then feel free to call me or, talk to the teacher or even a learning specialist at the school about what are the executive functioning skills that are needed to do this. Again, happy to talk to you for free, but you also have resources that you can go to. I hope that helps.
Awesome. Yeah, that does seem like a lot. I know someone asked a question. We have to wrap up. Let me just answer this question very briefly because someone asked it and I skipped it by mistake. Someone said, I want to ask about how to experiment when there's no flexibility with what the homework looks like. There actually doesn't have to be flexibility in the homework. It's how we approach the homework where the experiments come in. The measure of success is actually determined by the homework. So that won't be flexible. That won't be variable. It's how we approach it that actually changes. That's where the experimenting comes in. So hopefully that helps.
I did want to jump in with this one last question. There is perfectionist tendencies, which tend to have to do with anxiety. And if you want to address it real quick, I think we should because it's a big problem we see every single day.
Yeah. So perfectionism is usually a symptom of anxiety. And anxiety is, so perfectionism is this belief, if I get it perfect, then I won't have judgment, then all these bad things won't happen. And that is almost always a symptom of anxiety. The way I help parents treat anxiety, and I'm not a therapist anymore. I actually don't do any therapy. I teach parents how to support their kids. They may also need therapy. I don't want to take that away, but is by teaching kids coping strategies, how to deal with a discomfort. When kids know how to handle discomfort, they don't have to be a perfectionist because they can put in something that's less than perfect and they don't fear that result. So that's really about coping skills. And I work with so many kids. It's a very common symptom of kids with big emotions. I work with so many kids who are parents of kids who are perfectionists. Yeah.
It's also a way to feel in control. So sometimes if you give them the other tools to strengthen up their executive functioning skills on knowing what they're doing, knowing how things are going to how long they're going to take and what exactly they get to work on and giving them some choices in other areas of their life, sometimes it can ease that up as well. Lots of things to talk about there. You can reach out to either one of us. Happy to talk. I know that we're running a little bit over. I want to say thank you so much to my friend and colleague, Rachel Bailey. I always love having her. She's wonderful to have. We are going to post this up on our website within the next week, so you can watch it. We'll send you a note that we did so, and I hope that you share it with other friends because I think Rachel's advice is incredible, and it's for free this hour. So thank you so much all for joining, and I look forward to seeing it at our next Less Stress Parenting webinar.